Good evening, wanderer. You found me once again here in the quiet dark, where the Codex waits to be opened. I am Celine, keeper of the Whispered Codex. Tonight, I shall tell you a story of a little girl who thought her name was a curse, and of the long night she spent trying to leave herself behind. Her name is forever etched within the Codex, though she had once tried her best to forget it. So, get into a comfortable position, let your eyes grow heavy, and listen for the story that has been waiting to be told. The girl was small, but carried herself as though she wished to be anything but. Her thin arms were often crossed, her dark hair hiding most of her face. At the orphanage where she lived, her name, plain and old-fashioned, a name that belonged to another century, was a constant source of ridicule. Every morning at roll call, when the matron recited it aloud, a wave of snickers and cruel little smiles rippled through the children gathered there. The older girls had turned it into a mocking rhyme, which they sang under their breath whenever she passed. The boys would shout it across the courtyard, and then double over with laughter, making it sound sharp and ugly. Even the matron herself sometimes sighed when she said it, soft with something like pity, as though embarrassed for her. Every time someone spoke her name, it seemed to shrink. Each night, she lay awake in her cot, whispering the syllables into her pillow as though saying them enough times might make them hurt less. But it never worked. The more she said it, the less it sounded like anything she wanted to be. That was the kind of night it was when she ran. The rain had begun around dusk, pattering against the tall windows. The lamps along the corridor flickered and hissed. When the matron finally snuffed her candle and closed the door to her room, the girl sat up in the dark, feeling her heart beat faster and faster. She slipped her bare feet onto the floor and padded softly to the door, careful not to wake the little ones sleeping in their rows of cots. Out through the side door, down the stone steps into the wet grass. The forest beyond the edge of the orphanage grounds waited like a black sea. She did not cry as she went. The trees closed around her almost at once, ancient and thick, their branches interlacing overhead until only thin silver threads of moonlight slipped through. Damp earth clung to her toes. Her dress caught on briars and tore. Every now and then she thought she saw eyes glinting in the dark, but she kept walking. She only knew one thing. She would not go back until she had found a better name. It was deep in the forest, at what felt like the very center, a door, standing alone between two towering pines. It was tall and narrow, made of black oak and bound with strips of iron. A faint golden light spilled from the crack at its bottom. The air around it seemed warmer somehow, as though the rain did not dare fall too close. The girl stood before it for a long moment, her breath curling in the chill air, her fingers clenching and unclenching. She thought she could hear something faint beyond it, a rustling sound, like pages being turned, a low murmur of whispers. Names, perhaps. Names she did not yet know. Her hand found the handle. It was cold, but it turned easily, and the door opened without a sound. What lay beyond took her breath away. The library stretched on forever. Its shelves rose impossibly high, fading into darkness above, each stacked with neat rows of books that glowed faintly in the dim light. Their spines gleamed with letters etched in silver, gold, copper, even pearl. Aisles ran in every direction, their black floors polished to a soft sheen, candles floating in sconces along the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of ink and pressed flowers, faintly sweet and faintly bitter all at once. And at the center of it all, behind a great oak desk, sat the librarian. He was still as stone, his hands resting on the wood, a book open before him. His hair was gray, his robes dark and simple. He looked up when she entered and regarded her in silence. His eyes were storm cloud gray, yet there was no harshness in them, only quiet, knowing. The girl froze for a moment, uncertain, before lifting her chin and stepping past him. If he meant to stop her, he did not. The library's aisles stretched on forever. The girl stood there a long while after the black oak door closed silently behind her, staring up at the endless rows of shelves that disappeared into the gloom above. The air was heavy here, cool and still, fragrant with a strange perfume of beeswax, old paper, and something faintly sweet, like pressed flowers left too long between the pages of a book. Candles floated in sconces along the walls, their waxless flames guttering softly, shedding a light that seemed to move and breathe of its own accord. Tiny motes of dust drifted in the beams of pale gold, catching and falling in slow spirals. The shelves themselves were carved of blackened wood, ancient and smooth, worn by hands that must have touched them long before she was ever born. There were thousands of them. No, tens of thousands, running in endless straight aisles that sometimes bent sharply and spiraled away like staircases into the dark. On every shelf stood books. Each spine glowed faintly, as though lit from within, the letters etched in silver, gold, copper, even opalescent pearl. Some glimmered brighter when she passed them, as though acknowledging her presence. Others flickered and dimmed, hiding themselves from her eyes. She reached out and touched one at random, feeling the delicate letters raised under her fingertips. They were cool to the touch and seemed to hum faintly, whispering something she could not quite hear. Everywhere around her was the sound of pages turning, though she could see no one. She wandered slowly down the first aisle, her fingers trailing the spines of the books, eyes darting from one name to the next. Some names curled elegantly, long and lyrical like ribbons. Others were sharp and jagged, carved as though by the tip of a blade. There were names she could not pronounce, names that glowed like starlight, names that felt heavy in her chest even to look at. And as she walked, she began to feel it, that this place was alive. The shelves creaked faintly when she passed, as though they were acknowledging her presence. The floor beneath her bare feet was cold and polished to a mirror sheen, and sometimes she thought she saw faint footprints glowing just ahead of her own, only to vanish as soon as she noticed them. A chill breeze occasionally curled through the aisles, though there were no windows and no sound of wind beyond the walls. Every now and then, she caught sight of something moving between the stacks, a flicker of a black shape, or the faintest outline of a figure, though when she turned, there was nothing there but the quiet dark. Her own name, she would not even think it now, felt smaller with every step she took. There were names here that shimmered like moonlight on water, that resonated in her bones like the hush of a cathedral, that made her heart ache in ways she did not understand. But always, from the corners of her memory, her own name tried to follow her. She remembered her mother calling it to her from the kitchen doorway, voice soft and full of love. her father saying it as he lifted her into his arms, smiling down at her as though she were the brightest thing in his sky. Even then, she had hated it. Even then, she had wished for something grander. But here, in this place of whispers and shadow, she told herself it did not matter anymore. Here she could find something better. And as she walked deeper and deeper into the library's endless heart, she felt the hush of the ancient books curling around her like a spell. Something here would make her whole. It was near the end of one long aisle, tucked high on a shelf, that she found it. A slim black book, its spine glowing silver, its name curling in elegant letters like moonlight. She stared at it for a long time, her throat tight. This was the name she had been waiting for. This was the name she deserved. She reached up on tiptoe, pulled it down with trembling hands, and cradled it to her chest. That was when the librarian's voice drifted to her. He was nowhere near her, but it echoed between the stacks. "That name does not belong to you," he said in a warning but sympathetic tone. She turned, her fingers clutching the book, and ran back to the foyer. The librarian watched the determined girl, and their gaze met. He had kind and knowing eyes, but the girl did not stop. She held the book tighter. "It's better than what I have." He inclined his head ever so slightly and murmured, "Be sure it fits before you wear it." The girl opened the book, whispered the name aloud, and it draped itself over her like velvet, settling on her shoulders, making her stand straighter, taller, stronger. She was finally the person she was meant to be. When she returned to the orphanage, everything had changed. The children stared as she crossed the courtyard, their play forgotten, a ball rolling silently across the stones. The older girls, who once sang mocking rhymes under their breath, now trailed off mid-word and ducked their heads as she passed. The boys who had once jeered and shoved her now stumbled back to make room, glancing at each other with unease, as though she carried some strange and beautiful magic about her. Even the matron, standing at the door with her arms crossed, seemed to falter. Her brow knit faintly, but she said nothing. Instead, she murmured, "Dear," a word she had never before used for the girl, and stepped aside to let her through. The girl felt taller somehow, lighter, as though the name she wore now had lifted her above the dust and cruelty of the place. The sun was brighter, and the world was more colorful than ever before. That night, when the others were sleeping, she sat up in bed and whispered her new name to herself, rolling the syllables on her tongue, smiling faintly at the sound. It did not feel stolen. It felt earned. Days passed, and her new name spread like a quiet fire through the orphanage. The smaller children no longer clung to her skirt or followed at her heels during storms. They kept their distance now, watching her with wide eyes. But she told herself it was respect. The older girls who once giggled at her now fell silent when she entered a room, smoothing their skirts nervously and glancing down at their hands. The boys stopped throwing stones in the yard when she walked past. One of them even dropped his cap, blushing as she turned her gaze on him. And the matron, though she still seemed puzzled, even unsettled by the change, she no longer called her by her old name. She simply said, "You there," or "Dear," or nothing at all. The girl began to carry herself differently. Head higher, back straighter, feet quieter on the stone floors. Her voice was softer now, yet somehow more commanding. She could feel it, the new name settling in her bones, changing her into the person she always thought she ought to have been. One afternoon, standing before the cracked little mirror in the corner of the dormitory, she studied herself long and hard. Her eyes no longer looked down when they met her own reflection. Her shoulders no longer curved inward as though to make herself small. There was something sharp about her now, sharp and shining, like the tip of a quill. And she liked it. That night, she stood barefoot in the moonlight, streaming through the dormitory window, and whispered her stolen name into the dark. It slid over her like silk. It was no longer a name she spoke. It was who she was. For the first time, she thought she had been right all along. At first, she did not notice the change. The triumph of her new name was too bright, too intoxicating to leave room for doubt. For days, she walked through the orphanage with her head high, basking in the uneasy silence that followed her. Children scurried out of her way. The matron watched her with wary eyes. Even the littlest ones who had once clung to her in thunderstorms now lingered at doorways, wide-eyed and whispering. It was only when she lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, that she began to feel it. A faint hollowness, like a quiet room after the candles have been blown out. Her shy friend was the first to drift away. They had once sat side by side at meals, whispering to each other behind cupped hands, hiding crumbs in their pockets to share later. But now, each morning, the shy girl slipped into the corner of the dining hall, keeping her head down, picking at her bread. At first, the girl thought nothing of it. She assumed her friend was simply shy, even shyer now in the glow of her new name. But one morning she reached out to touch her friend's sleeve as she passed, and the shy girl flinched, pulling her arm away as though burned. The girl froze, her hand falling to her side. Her friend would not meet her eyes. The matron no longer tucked her in at night. She had never been exactly warm, but she had always paused at the foot of her bed before blowing out the candle, smoothing her blankets, murmuring her name in that soft, absent-minded way adults do when they care, without knowing quite how to show it. But now, the matron passed by without a glance. The light snuffed out while the girl still lay awake, staring into the dark. She caught them one evening in the corner of the courtyard, whispering. "She's not her anymore," one of them said. "I don't know who she is now." And the others nodded solemnly, watching her with wide, uncertain eyes. Still, she told herself it did not matter. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? To be respected, admired, left alone. She told herself the ache in her chest was just the weight of growing up. But at night, in the quiet, her stolen name began to sound different when she whispered it. Hollow somehow. It no longer settled in her chest like a jewel. It rattled there, sharp and cold. One morning, she found her shy friend in the garden. The girl sat in the mud, her skirts damp, her face buried in her hands. She was crying softly, shoulders shaking. The girl knelt beside her and reached out, whispering her name. But the shy girl pulled away, her tear-streaked face twisted with something between fear and sorrow. "You're not her anymore," she whispered. "You're someone else. What happened to my kind and warm friend? I don't know who you are." The words struck deep, leaving a quiet ache that spread through her ribs. That night she dreamed. In her dream, she stood at the threshold of her childhood home. Her mother and father waited inside, their faces warm and familiar, smiling at her as though she had never left. Her mother opened her arms. Her father called her name, her real name, and beckoned her forward. She ran to them, but as she crossed the threshold, they faltered. Their smiles faded, confusion clouding their eyes. "Who are you?" her mother asked softly. Her father looked past her, calling her name again, searching the empty house as though she were not there. She tried to speak, tried to explain, but no sound came. They turned away, still calling her real name, and disappeared into the dark. She woke with a sob, clutching the blanket to her chest, her cheeks wet with tears. For the first time in so long, she whispered her real name into the silence, her voice cracking. And though it was small, though it trembled, it answered. The girl sat up in bed long after her nightmare, her breath coming quick and shallow, her cheeks damp with tears. The dormitory was silent around her, rows of sleeping children curled beneath their blankets, the faint sound of wind rattling the panes. Her real name still echoed in her chest, soft and warm now, though fragile as a flickering candle. She swung her legs over the edge of the cot and slipped to the floor, the chill of the stone biting at her bare feet. For a moment, she just stood there in the dark, unsure of what to do. She thought of her shy friend, crying in the garden. She thought of the littlest children, whispering, "I don't know who she is anymore." She thought of her mother and father, turning away into the dark, calling for a daughter who never came, and she could not bear it another moment. She crept down the hall, silent as a shadow, past the matron's room where the faint light of a dying candle glowed behind the door, down the stairs, through the quiet dining hall, out into the courtyard. The orphanage loomed behind her, its windows black and blank now, empty of warmth. She stepped into the grass, wet with dew and cool against her feet, and began to run towards the forest. It was darker tonight than it had been before, the branches arching over her like black ribs, their tangled fingers catching at her hair and skirts. The path wound ahead faintly, only scraps of moonlight glinting between the leaves. Every step into the forest sent a shiver up her spine, but she did not stop. Somewhere deep inside, she already knew the way. And the further she went, the more familiar it felt, as though the hush of the trees was guiding her, whispering her true name back to her in pieces. At last, between two ancient pines, she saw the door. It rose from the earth as though it had always been there, black and tall, the faint glow of golden light spilling out from the crack beneath it. Her breath caught in her throat. She stepped inside, and the hush of the library wrapped around her instantly, heavy and soft as velvet. The door creaked close behind her. Candles flickered along the walls, their flames bowing faintly as though in greeting. The scent of pressed flowers and old paper settled in her lungs. The endless rows of black shelves stretched ahead of her, glowing faintly, whispering her name, her real name, this time just at the edge of hearing. At the great oak desk sat the librarian, just as before, his eyes lifting to meet hers as she entered. But this time, there was something new in his gaze. Not just sadness, but approval, faint and quiet, like the smile of a stranger who sees a lost child come home. He spoke not a word, but motioned his head toward the aisle where she first found the book. The girl made her way through the stacks, the path familiar to her now. When she finally reached the shelf, she found that a new book had replaced the one she took. Its letters glowed like sunlight, filling her with warmth, calling her back. For a long moment, She stared at the book, remembering all the love and meaning behind her name. She remembered how it was given to her with love, how it was spoken with love. And she now knew that no matter what the world may think, this was her true name, and she will wear it with pride for the rest of her days. She took her book from the shelf and spoke her name. The girl felt a warm light bloom within her chest, filling every hollow place that the stolen name had left behind. It did not feel grand, it was not remarkable, nor was it mysterious, but it was beautiful because it was hers. The girl offered the librarian a grateful nod before turning to go. Beyond the black oak doors, the first pale light of dawn spilled through the forest, warmer and brighter than she had ever seen. She smiled and placed a hand over her heart, feeling her true name there once more. Quiet, steadfast, and finally home. Remember, wanderer, you are more than the names others give you, or the ones you try to steal. Wear yours proudly, for it belongs to only you. The Codex closes for now, but there is always another tale to tell. So rest well, wanderer. Until we meet again in the quiet dark, may you sleep deeply and dream warmly. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow our podcast so you never miss a new story. I shall be waiting there in the quiet dark with another story just for you.